management of Recover Committee. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. I am asked to introduce the speaker, but the speaker needs no introduction in this market. Dr. Sam is very famous among the QS professionals within the construction industry. Yet, for the benefit of the newcomers and as a protocol, I would like to briefly introduce Professor Sam. Professor Sam holds 2 doctoral degrees, Doctor of Philosophy, PhD in Construction Contract Administration, and Doctor of Science degree in Surveying Science and Contract Administration. He holds fellow memberships of various international institutions, fellow of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, fellow of the Australian Institute of Quantity Surveyors, fellow of the Institution of Quantity Surveyors Sri Lanka, fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators England, fellow of the Chartered Institute of Building England, etc., etc. There are many lists. I did not read it. He has more than 35 years of experience, 21 years in Oman and 14 years in Dubai. We wish you would have come a bit early to Dubai. His experience in dispute resolution includes over 100 expert opinion assignments and 16 nominations as arbitrator, 3 as conciliator and 1 as mediator. He is a regular lecturer at RICS, FAIQS, events on the topics of contract administration and dispute resolution. He is author and lecturer of training course, Be a Sound Contract Administrator in 10 session, Contract Administrator Advanced Course, Contract Administrator Master Class. Apart from all those things, as far as FIQS is concerned, he has been a tremendous support to all of us right from the inception of the institute. I remember attending his seminars in the earlier days at Dadko compound and which were very highly beneficial to many members of FIQS. It's not an exaggeration if I say this. He has provided a phenomenal support to all the members of FIQS, particularly the senior members, for attaining the professional qualifications and membership such as MSCs, MRCs, FCIArb, etc., etc. We salute, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We are very grateful to you because we remember you throughout our career. And without wasting much time, ladies and gentlemen, may I request all of you put your hands together and welcome Professor Samaratunga for the dance.
18 years, I think. 18 years. Yes, it's not 14 years, it's 13 years. One of the very first gentlemen that I met when I arrived here in Dubai from Oman, when we were doing the R488 ships, I drove the expansion in Jebel Ali. Yes, I was with Indrawansa working for those days roads were made by, or rather developed by, Dubai municipality. RTA has not been formed. Mr. Harp, I think I have briefly met here and there, but not at the time when I was working with Datco on those projects. It's good to see you all back in the classroom. Most of you know me. Most of you have attended the CPD sessions that I have conducted in the past for the Institute of Indian Quantity Surveyors. From the time it was called the Association of Indian Quantity Surveyors, the institute was formed recently. One reason I titled this particular session as Revisiting a Dozen Courses Where Rates and Prices Become Inapplicable is because you have already heard most of it at the CPD sessions that I have conducted for you during the past several years. You will recall these titles. We went through everything there is to know about variations and their valuations, and also everything that is there to know about extension of time, prolongation cost, especially when there are concurrent delays, how to find the entitlements of the contractor. Usually in the market, in a concurrent delay situation, you can just get away by having the extension of time, but the employers never honor the contractor's monetary claim. We looked at 13 arguments why the contractor should be paid his prolongation cost despite his own concurrent delay, if you remember, and which made a revolution those days in the market. And most of the developers were quite against me at the time for advising contractors to go and claim money despite their own defaults. But later, we saw the development in the law as well, and in various instances that the contractors were getting compensated. In all these sessions, from time to time, we looked at how rates and prices become inapplicable in the bill of quantities to value variations, which is a common area of dispute. When the contractor says, my rate is inapplicable, usually the employer says, well, you signed and agreed that all the variations would be valued using the existing rates and prices. So it was a difficult thing for contractors to argue that the existing rates and prices are inapplicable or inappropriate in certain circumstances. And therefore, the time is now right again, I suppose, to go and revisit those. They exceed some 12 reasons why rates and prices become inapplicable. If you recall, during the first session when we looked at the variation and valuation of variations, where we spent some 4 hours in your CPD sessions, we looked at one of the subclauses where how we value variations, which is subclause 52.1. And the 4 ways that we value variations, in addition to using day work rates, if they were instructed as day works, that is, these are the 4 ways that you value variations, if you recall. You use the existing rates and prices which is in the contract to value variations, or you use them as the basis, or you agree new rates and prices, and then in due consultation with the employer, the 2 parties come to an agreement, the contractor and the engineer, wherein which the engineer fixes the rates. You use the existing rates and prices only where, in the opinion of the engineer, the same shall be applicable. Then only you use it. So therefore, the contract recognizes, perhaps, it's not always that they become applicable. They said, where it is applicable, you use them. And then the contract addresses the next scenario. If the contract does not contain any rates or prices applicable, then you use the existing rates as the basis, either by prorating or by breaking down the rate into a small mini bill of quantities where the total is the rate, and removing from that what is inapplicable and adding back what should be applicable to arrive at a varied rate or price. So the contract recognizes that rates and prices can become inapplicable. Let us look at one small, simple event where a rate becomes inapplicable. While waiting for this session to start, if you had an opportunity to read this particular question posed at you, you would recall how complicated the pricing of this simple variation would be. In a lump sum contract, what we call lump sum contracts in this part of the world are those contracts where, on completion of the works, the contractor is paid the full lump sum price. The work is not remeasured. That's only in this part of the world, you have to remember. Lump sum is used in different sense in different parts of the world. But we'll see how lump sums are treated in this part of the world. We'll stick to that for the moment, okay? So remeasurement contracts are those where you remeasure the whole of the works and value them for payment. In lump sum contracts, you don't remeasure the work done. You pay the contractor the full lump sum price of, say, 100 million for this project, subject, of course, to instructed variations. So you adjust the value of the variations against the lump sum. In such a contract, the drawings show 200 meters of boundary wall. But in the bill of quantities by the employer, not that the employer has prepared the bill of quantities, but is responsible for it because his consultants prepared it. The quantity is given as only 100 meters. And the tenderer has priced it at 100 dirhams a meter at 10,000 the boundary wall line. Such errors are quite common. The bill compiler made a mistake. Probably he used the wrong scale, or he made a calculation error, added the length of the property to the breadth of the property, forgot to multiply by 2. Okay? But this error would not have made any difference if there is no variation in structure. The contractor would have completed the project. Nobody is going to remeasure this boundary wall. This is a lump sum contract. So the contractor would be paid this 100 million lump sum contract price. This error would not have mattered. But in this particular instance, a variation has been instructed. So let us say the employer says we don't have much money. Let's build the boundary wall later. So the engineer instructs an omission. A variation has been instructed to delete the whole of the boundary wall, which, okay, whole of the boundary wall is to be deleted. If the contractor does not construct the boundary wall, on completion of the project, should we still pay the contractor the 100 million lump sum contract price? Of course not, isn't it? We should deduct something, isn't it? For the boundary wall that he did not construct. How much should we deduct? The contractor would say that, yes, of course, the contractor would say, take out the whole item, that is where I priced my boundary wall. In other words, he would say, take out the 100 meters at 100 dirhams, 10,000. That is what the contractor would say. But the employer would say, Mr. Contractor, I am not asking you to omit 100 meters of boundary wall. I asked you to omit the whole of the boundary wall. And the whole of the boundary wall is 200 meters. And he's right. And therefore the 200 meters has to be taken for the valuation of this variation. And the employer would also argue now that the parties signed and agreed in the contract that the rates would be used to value variations. And he's right once again. And therefore the employer would be looking for a saving of 20,000, whereas the contractor wants to give a saving of 10,000. Now you can see how easily the dispute can arise in this simple variation. Now who is right and who is wrong?
Employer right.
What?
Drawing state precedence over the view.
Well, we'll see in a little while. We'll see in a little while who is right. We will in fact take a vote and see probably who is right or who is wrong. But then there is a third way of valuing this variation. Contractor would say, okay, Mr. Employer, if you don't want to use 100 as the quantity, if you want to use 200, then my rate is inapplicable to value the variation. I want another rate. Now, if by any chance the variation was an additional work, yes, there are ways and means of arguing that your existing rates and prices are inapplicable. For instance, you can say the nature of the work is such that the existing rate is inapplicable. Let's look at an example. We have got 1,000 cubic meters of excavation in the bill of quantities and a rate for that 3 or 4 dirhams a cubic meter, for instance. And the contractor is asked to do another 100 or 200 cubic meters somewhere else for some other work, additional work within the same site. Now the contractor would say, my rate is inapplicable because the nature of this excavation is different. Because I would have used machines to dig according to the original scope of work. That is why my rate is 3 or 4 dirhams. But here I can't use machine dig. This is closer to a gas pipeline or some other condition such. I have to do hand dig here. Therefore my rate is inapplicable. And he's right, because the nature of the additional work is different to the nature of the original scope of work. Or the contractor could have argued, on the economies of scale, his rate is inapplicable if additional work is instructed. Let us say there is 100,000 cubic meters of fill in the original scope and in the bill of quantities. In a road embankment fill, for instance, 100,000 cubic meters. And he has a rate for that fill. Now he is asked to do some 50 cubic meters of fill in the site, additional work. Can he do it for the same rate? No, of course not. On the economies of scale, usually larger quantities attract smaller rates and smaller quantities attract higher rates. And it's right, because bulk work cannot be done to do these 50 cubic meters, whereas the 100,000 cubic meters, yes. So there are many other grounds of that nature that we are going to look at. If the variation is additional work, how the rates and prices become inapplicable. But in this particular instance, it is not additional work. It is the omission of the original scope of work for which the contract has already quoted 100 in the bill of quantities. How can we now say his rate is inapplicable? It would be very difficult for him to argue that. But is there any way of doing that? Let us see. Okay. So there are three options to value this variation. 1, 2, 3. What I'm going to do is to ask you to first vote on these options. I know one gentleman already said that the employee is right, therefore the correct answer is option 2. Okay, 20,000 saving. Okay. So let us see which is your option. But before doing that, I want to tell you the option 1 is an incorrect answer. Why is option 1 an incorrect answer? Because in lump sum contracts, you never use the BOQ quantity for any purpose whatsoever. Okay? You don't use the BOQ quantity to prepare your program. You don't use the BOQ quantity to order material. You don't use the BOQ quantity to prepare your interim valuations. And you never use the bill of quantity to value variations. You always take the actual quantity from the drawing for the valuation of variations. And therefore, we have got two options here now. One with 200, other one with 200. So item 1 is the incorrect solution. Now those of you who say option 2, 20,000 saving, is the right answer. Let's see some hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We have 10 people who say 20,000 is the right answer. Now those of you who say item 3 is the right answer, 10,000. Oh, that's, we appear to have a lot of contractors, contract administrators in the audience. Very few employers, contract administrators. Okay. But still, there are few of you there that I noticed are on the fence. Neither there nor here, right? Why is that? Probably they think the same way that I think. Either of them would be the right answer, depending on the circumstances. How can 20,000 or 10,000 would be the right answer? If I said at least 1 or 3 would be the right answer, the bottom line figures are the same. But how can 20,000 or 10,000 would be the right answer? Well, I said depending on the circumstances. What are the circumstances? If the employers, contract administrators are successful in arguing that the existing rate is applicable to value the variations, 20,000 would succeed. If the contractors, contract administrators are successful in arguing that existing rate is inapplicable, that the contractor is entitled to a varying rate, then 10,000 would succeed. In a lump sum contract, how do you argue that the existing rate is applicable or inapplicable to value a variation? For that purpose, you need to know everything there is to know about how lump sum contracts are formed. So let us spend 5-10 minutes to see how lump sum contracts are formed. Then we'll come back to this question and see how we argue either 20,000 or 10,000 is the right answer. Okay? There are 3 types of lump sum contracts in the industry. And in its first category, we give the contractor, the tenderers, the drawing specifications to price the project and submit the tender price. We don't give a bill of quantities, we only give a schedule of rates for the tenderers to price. In the other 2 categories, in addition to the drawings and specifications, we give the tenderer a bill of quantities. The difference is in the category B, the bill of quantities has provision for the tenderer to price any error in the BOQ, especially quantity errors between drawings and specifications, item description errors, missing items, and things of that nature. Whereas in the last category, BOQ does not have a provision for the tenderer to price an adjustment as above. So the first category of lump sum tenders are quite common in the UK, and the second category, B, some parts of Europe and Australasia generally. And the third category, where BOQ does not have provision for the tenderers to price and adjustment as above, but the tenderers are given a bill of quantities in addition to drawings and specifications, are quite common in this part of the world, right? We are very familiar with such lump sum tenders. So how would the tenderers estimate the price? These three types of different lump sum contracts. On receipt of the documents in the tenderers estimation department, the first thing that they would do is to check the bill of quantities or prepare their own bill of quantities, isn't it? These are lump sum contract. The quantities are at contractor's risk. So the contractor cannot afford to take any chances here. Quantities may be wrong. He's not going to get any remeasurement on this. Therefore, he will check the bill of quantities first. So the taker off would now measure from the drawings and find the correct quantity using the right scale and correct calculations, 200 meters. And an estimator would now build up the rate for that from first principles or his library or whatever he had been preparing for research jobs. He has the rate for it, which he works out as 50. And the tender compiler would now price this item. 200 into 50, 10,000 for the item. All the other items of this project are similarly priced and all of them are added together and then they come to their tender price of say 100,000. Now this has to be conveyed to the employer. So we have this form of tender which says, Mr. Employer will construct this project for you for 100,000. Enter it, sign, stamp, write company name. But when you are about to submit it, the instructions to tenderer says, together with that, you have to return the drawings and the specifications, each page initial stamp, so you do that as well. And the instructions to tenderers say, you have to fill and return the schedule of rates as well. Now we have a schedule of rates to be returned. And this is what a schedule of rates looks like. There is an item number and a description, no quantity, but a unit is there. Per meter, you have to put a rate. Now, these rates are usually used to value variations and interim payments. Not the final payment, because final payment is a lump sum. Okay? Only for interim payments as well as for variations. What rate would the tenderer put in there in category A, this type of lump sum contracts? 50, of course. He can't afford to put anything else. If he puts anything else there, by any chance if the boundary wall is omitted, money would go from all his other items, isn't it? If you put 100 or 200 there, if the 200 meters of boundary wall is omitted, 40,000 would go away. So 10,000 for the item, 30,000 from his other work. And therefore he can't afford to take any chances. He will put the right rate of 50. In the category 2 types of, B type of lump sum tenders, where instead of the schedule of rates, the tenderer is given a bill of quantities and the quantity is incorrect, but there is a trace given in every bill or at the end of the bill of quantities at the grand summary or part summary page, there is an item given. Insert here and the adjustments required due to errors in quantities, descriptions and all. What rate would the tenderer put there for the boundary wall now? 50 again. Yes, he cannot afford to put anything else because that would be used to value variations. The two parties signed and agreed. And therefore he can't afford to put anything else there. But we have a problem now because the extension comes to only 5,000 and if you add all the items together, your lump sum total is short by 5,000. You won't come to 100 million. But the tenderer has a way of correcting it. He will put the missing 5,000 there. That is the error that we price. Okay. In both these types of lump sum contracts, ladies and gentlemen, you can never argue that the existing rate is inapplicable to value an omission. Omission of original scope of work. You can never argue that the rate is inapplicable. The rate is always applicable. Does not matter whether the contractor put the 5,000 there or left it blank. If he left it blank, it is understood to be that there is a minus 5,000 from another item and they have cancelled each other. But as long as the provision is there in the EOQ for the tenderer to put it in, the rate is always applicable to value omissions. And therefore, in our previous question, if the tender was of this type A or type B, then 20,000 is the right answer. 200 is the right quantity, BOQ rate is always applicable, and therefore 20,000 saving is the right answer. Now let us see the third type of tenders. This is what it is. There is a BOQ given and there is an erroneous quantity. And if the tenderer now puts 50 there, it comes to 5,000, his tender total would be short by 5,000. He has nowhere else to put that 5,000. And therefore, he has no other option but to put his bottom line figure for this particular boundary wall, the 10,000, against this item. And once that is done, it is a one-way journey. There is only one rate possible, and that rate is an erroneous, inappropriate, inapplicable, arbitrary rate of 100, which has no bearing whatsoever on the actual cost per meter of the boundary wall. And that is what appears in the bill of quantities. As long as there are no variations instructed, that's fine. Every time a variation, an omission is instructed, the contractor will shout, my rate is inapplicable. Why? Because, Mr. Engineer, your quantity is incorrect. I was not given a place to price that error. Therefore, I had to price the error within the item, resulting in an erroneous, inappropriate, inapplicable rate. And therefore, I want a new rate, varied rate, to value this variation, which would be arrived at by taking the extended amount of 10,000 for this item divided by the drawings quantity of 200 to arrive at the new rate of 50. If this is the type of tender that our question was based on, then the third option, 10,000 saving, is the correct one. Because the contractor will succeed in getting his varied rates of price. Okay?
100 meter addition is instructed, what do you do?
Sorry? Yes, good question. Good question, but we discussed it to some extent. Now in this particular instance, in these two cases, the rate I said is always applicable to value omissions. So if additional work is instructed also, it is applicable to value additions, subject to other arguments like the economies of scale, the nature of the things. You can argue those to say the rate is inapplicable. When you come to this, every time 1 meter is omitted, contractor would say my rate is inapplicable. Every time 1 meter of boundary wall is instructed as additional work, of course the contractor will keep quiet. Why? Because he wants to get paid at 100. But at this moment in time, the engineer should, in fairness to the employer, tell the contractor, fine, we are instructing additional boundary wall, but we are not going to pay you at 100. But how many engineers know that they can do that? Sad to say, not many. And that is why employers should have their bills of quantities prepared in such a manner, rates and prices, and say, Mr. Contractor, your rate 100 is incorrect. I'm not going to pay you that. For instance, if for 200 meters of boundary wall, he is going to do that for 10,000. If the engineer instructs 200 more, he would say, I'm not going to pay you 20,000 to do the additional 200. I'll still pay you 10,000. In other words, he would pay you that. But either for the contractor to say his rate is inapplicable when an omission is instructed, or for the employer or the engineer to say that the rate can be changed when they instruct additional work, there should be provision in the contract, isn't it? You can't do that outside the contract. And that is stated in the next subclause of the valuation clause, which is subclause 52.2, which says that provided that if the nature or amount of any varied work relative to the nature or amount of the whole of the work, or to any part thereof, in the opinion of the engineer, for any item of the works is, by reason of such varied work, rendered inappropriate or inapplicable, then the contractor would give a notice under 52.2a and ask for a varied rate of price. And there is provision there to do that. And when additional work is instructed, in such circumstances, the engineer would give a notice under 52.2b to the contractor of his intention to vary the rate of price. So it is there. Okay. And this is also the clause under which you claim as a contractor that your rate is inapplicable on the economies of scale or the different conditions, circumstances under which you do the additional work because of this year, provided that the amount of any varied work is such that compared to the original scope of work, the rate is inapplicable. You say the amount of work, 50 cubic meters, compared to my 100,000 in the BOQ. You say my rate is inapplicable by giving the notice under 52.2a. And there is also the clause under which you say the circumstances, the nature of doing the work, hand dig to machine dig, is by saying, provided that if the nature of that varied work is different to the original scope of work, my rate is inappropriate, inapplicable, I can claim my varied rate of price under 52.2a. Now we can start building our 1 dozen courses of rates, prices start becoming inapplicable. First one is the economies of scale, larger quantities attract lower rates and vice versa. And the next one is nature, hand dig to machine dig. Third one, the problem that we saw, the error, lack of provision in a bill of quantity to price the errors, differences in lump sum contracts, especially when omissions are instructed. Excessive rate becomes inapplicable. And also when additions are instructed by the engineer, the rate becomes inapplicable. So you can give a notice under 52.2b, or the contractor can give the notice. So there are 3 ways that rates and prices can become inapplicable. And also during the very first session, variations and varied work, those 10 sessions that we conducted for the Indian Quantity Surveyors Institute or Private Association, we looked at other things in this clause. It's not everything and anything that the engineer can instruct on a project. Very limited things he can instruct. You remember? We discussed that. Only things which are necessary or appropriate. Okay? Necessary, it has to be necessary for the completion of the original scope of work. Only those things he can instruct. Or things which are appropriate. He forms an opinion that it is the appropriate thing, otherwise there would be a wastage of money or it is against sustainability. Going back to those examples that we discussed there. Okay? And especially if it is additional work altogether, then under E, execute additional work of any kind, which is wide powers to the engineer, but then these powers are again controlled by saying, execute additional work of any kind, necessary for the completion of the works. And therefore, if the engineer instructs any work which is not necessary, okay, if he instructs any work which is not appropriate, contractor would say, my rates are inapplicable to one. This is outside this contract, Mr. Engineer. You don't have authority to instruct things which are not necessary and not appropriate. And therefore, we are outside this contract. I want different rates and prices to value my work. And that's another ground under which he would claim. Instructing variations which are neither necessary nor appropriate. Of course, you cannot just keep quiet and do it at late hours for varied rates or prices. Your frontline defense is the example that we looked at, if you remember. Let's repeat that example. This is an interior fit-out contract of a hotel which has got 200 bedrooms. Each bedroom has got 2 ceiling lamps, okay? Except one bedroom out of this 200 which has a very expensive projection lantern in the corner which throws, very nice light onto the wall. Remote control, very expensive lens arrangement, digitally controlled and all that. Okay. At the tender stage, the tenderer would not find the price of this particular projection lantern. And therefore, he priced his ceiling lights at 100 dirhams each. Okay. And the projection lantern, he put 500 dirhams. It's one-off. If it is more than that, anyway, he has the buffer anyway and we absorb the cost. It's just one-off. During the post-contract stage, he found that this particular projection lantern is 30,000 dirhams. Okay? But he had to do it, lump sum contract. He made it because the contract is bound by his own errors in the bill of quantities. Now the engineer and the employer, looking during the post-contract stage at this bill of quantities, finds this very nice projection lantern which cost 30,000 is priced by the contractor at 500 dirhams. Okay? So he will order 199 more, provide one in each room. And the poor contractor will go bankrupt now. So how can he now protect himself? By asking from the engineer, Mr. Engineer, under what provision in the contract are you instructing this on me? So the engineer will have to say, the only one is 51.1E additional work. But Mr. Engineer, that additional work has to be necessary to complete the original scope of work. 199 more projection lanterns are not necessary to complete the original scope of work. One is enough. That is the original scope of work. So you would protest first. Then tell, therefore, but however, if you want them, well, I will help you out, but my rate is this, 30,000. So you ask for your varied rate of price. And also we discussed during that particular session the timing of instructions, right? If you recall. It's not after the contractor has demobilized, for instance, the engineer cannot instruct variations, just like that, except very minor things like amendments, reconstructions, or defect shrinkages, or that created caused by others. But he has to pay the contractor. The engineer has to certify, and the employer has to pay the contractor varied rates or prices for that. Not BOK rates. He's not bound by the BOK rates. Okay. So if variations are instructed after the work is taken over, after the contractor has demobilized, okay, any additional work he will refuse the contractor. Sorry, I don't have the resources on site to do it. If you want me to do it, I will mobilize and do that. Okay. His own defects he has to do at no extra cost anyway. But anything else that they want at different rates or prices. So that's another reason how rates and prices become inactive. Then we get to the contractor's entitlement to extension of time and prolongation cost. During our previous CPD, that's one of the most interesting ones you recall. If the contract clearly says in a clause, the contract is entitled to extension of time, entitled to prolongation cost. Life is that much easier. We quote that clause and prepare our claim. And the engineer's life is also that much easier. He will look at the clause, it clearly says entitled, therefore he would determine it. If the clauses are silent about the contractor's entitlement, how do you find out whether the contractor has the entitlement or not? We discuss about 5 different tests to be applied to see whether the contractor has the extension of time entitlement, and 4 different tests to be applied to see whether the contractor has the entitlement to prolongation cost. And by applying those tests, we also found that the contractor has the entitlement to extension of time and prolongation cost even during concurrent delay scenarios, despite the contractor's own culpable delays. Okay? We'll repeat them in the future if there are newcomers who join the, I don't know, there must be a lot of new people. So I think in the future, when time permits, we'll repeat all those 10 sessions like what we did over a 10-month period, one each. That is what we did in the past. We'll do it again in the future. So we are not going to go through over that. That 1.5 hour time would not allow for that. It's a 25-hour course, if you remember. 2.5 hours each session for 10 sessions. During this particular, these are the 11 types of 11 different events we found which are mentioned in these clauses which could delay the project. Delaying events, 21 delaying events, of which 11 are of various nature, but 10 are of variations nature and varied work, and 51.1 is one of them. You claim the extension of time pursuant to 44.1a. Most of the other, the clause itself says the contractor's cost shall be added to the contract price, so he has the entitlement. But when a variation causes the delay, how can the contractor claim the prolongation cost? Extension of time he claims pursuant to 44.1a, extra or additional work. How does the contractor claim prolongation cost when the variations delay the project as part of the value of the variation pursuant to subclause 52.2a that we saw just now. That is how the contractor claims prolongation cost. So he would now say, Mr. Engineer, you instructed me varied work. As a result of that, a price contained in the contract has been rendered inappropriate or inapplicable. I want a varied price. He would give the notice on the 52.2a claim. What price? My price for supervision, which I put in the preliminary bill, which is for 12 months. My project was for 12 months. Now you have delayed me. You are giving me 2 months extension of time, and therefore my project manager, my supervision team, they have to be on site for 14 months. Therefore my price in the preliminaries is inapplicable, inappropriate. I want a varied price model. My tower crane, which was to be there for 12 months, has to be there for 14 months. My site officers, which were to be there for 12 months, have to be there for 14 months. My performance bond, my insurance, all those which were to be for a limited period, have to be there for 2 more months. That is how the contractor claims his prolongation cost as a varied price. What if it is a subcontract? It's not always that we have a preliminary bill in a bill of quantity, isn't it? Sometimes we have item rate bills. Usually subcontractors, small subcontractors, they don't have preliminary bills, just item rate bills. Where would the subcontractor, without the preliminary bill, price his supervision, his performance bond, his insurance? Spread throughout the rates, isn't it? So his 10 months supervision, 10 months performance bond, 10 months insurance are spread throughout the rates now. So he would now say, Mr. Engineer, because of this varied work you instructed, my rates have been rendered inappropriate or inapplicable. Please give me varied rates. And you ask for a 1%, 2% or 3% uplift on all the rates. Because the rates include a 10 month supervision. So it has to be varied. Or an ideal. The contractor would say, Mr. Engineer, keep my rates as they are in the BOQ. Keep my prices as they are in the BOQ. Give me an extra payment to cover my prolongation costs. That is how you ideally claim prolongation cost when variation delays the project. Right? So, if you don't have a separate preliminaries bill in a subcontract situation, rates and price becomes inapplicable, where rates, prices become the vehicle for paying prolongation costs. Because some employers, some engineers, consultants say, we will pay you based on preliminaries here. Things. We will not go for the actual cost. Actual contractor's entitlement is to actual cost that he incurs on site. Okay? But then you have to go to arbitration or litigation to get it. It's very unlikely that the engineer and the employer would allow it. They would try to pay you your preliminaries or site overheads on some basis. So if you don't have a preliminaries bill, there, your rates and prices become inapplicable. Why? Because they have to be increased now to include this additional site overhead. Our 8th session out of the 10 sessions was the project cost control, method of measurement, session 3, and other measurement principles. And we looked at an example in those, if you recall, of average rates, of costs not proportional to quantities. If you have, a pipeline from point A to point B, running through the desert up to say point C, 800 meters, and about 200 meters through a township, altogether 1000 meters, 800 in the desert, 200 to the township. If the bill of quantities has only one item for this, pipeline A to B, 1000 meters, how would the lender price this in the bill of quantities? There are different, you put an average rate, isn't it? Because there are different cost considerations in constructing the pipeline in the desert when compared to constructing the pipeline in the township. In the desert, you can use your equipment, whatever you have got with you, of any size, whereas in the township, there are restrictions in the area of operations. You need special boom sizes and things like that. Whereas in the desert, you can leave the excavator unprotected. Nobody is going to fall in that. In the township, children could fall. You have to protect it. You must have lighting in the night. In the desert, you can leave the excavated earth, spoiled heap next to the excavation until someday you lay the pipe to fill it back. In the township, on a daily basis, you have to remove them and then bring it back when you want to refill. So there are different cost considerations. If it costs you, say, 100 dirhams a meter to construct it in the desert, and say 200 dirhams a meter to construct it in the township, you will calculate the total cost of doing this particular pipeline, 800 into 1,000, 80,000 plus 200 into 200, say 40,000, 120,000. And that is what you would put here, 120,000 dirhams. And therefore your rate is an average rate of 120. That's how you price it in the tender. Because that is how the employer's bill of quantities asks you to price one item. Every time 1 meter of boundary, pipeline is instructed extra on that side in the township. 1 meter. The contractor would shout, my rate is inapplicable to value that variation. And he's right. Because it's going to cost you 200 dirhams to construct it. You can't do it for 120. And every time 1 meter of additional pipeline is instructed here, of course the contractor would keep quiet. Because they want to get paid at 120. At this moment in time, the engineer should know, in fairness to the employer, that he should not pay at 120 but at 100. And that we discussed because we have to control the cost of the project. How do you control the cost of the project? By having a forecast for time, those 14 is the forecast, quality. We discussed all these things. For the price bill of quantities is the budget, the frame of reference for the employer and for the contractor. You take the bill of quantities, from that you remove all your profit margins from all the items, you remove all the overhead margins from the items, you remove your risk factors from all the items and pass that balance to the site, which is the budget. Okay? And to achieve this accurate price at the tender stage, employer have to give accurate. So this is the purpose of a bill of quantities, to provide such information of the quantities of work as to enable tenders to be prepared efficiently and accurately. Why should the employer worry about whether the contractor could prepare the tender accurately or not? If he prepares it inaccurately, he will go bankrupt. Why should the employer worry about it? Because if the employer gives the wrong information and the contractor prepares the tender incorrectly and if contractor goes bankrupt, there is going to be unemployment in the society. And with unemployment comes, the society becomes poor, impoverishment, which is against public policy. And the law is there to protect public policy, and that is why employers of this in the construction industry, the paymasters of the construction industry, where the money changes hand from employers to contractors, are required to not let contractors go bankrupt. And that is why even during variation, they have to pay the right price. And that was one of our arguments for prolongation cost despite concurrent delay, in the concurrent delay situation, if you recall. And that is why the BOQ information has to be correct. And the purpose of the BOQ is when a contract has been entered into to provide for use of the price bill of quantities in the valuation of work done. Valuation of work done is not only original scope of work done, valuation of work done is also the valuation of variations done. And therefore, if the bill of quantities cannot be used to value the variations, the purpose of the BOQ is lost. And how do you achieve that then? Then the method of measurement according to which the BOQ is prepared should distinguish between items of work of different nature and between work of same nature but having different cost considerations. Same nature but having different cost consideration, you should distinguish between. So the BOQ should have two separate items instead of one item. Pipeline A to C, pipeline C to B. 800 meters, 200 meters. Now the tenderer can put in two rates there. Whenever there is a variation instructed there, that is a date. Whenever there is a variation instructed here, that is a date. Okay. And also, the bill of quantities should allow for separating any cost not proportional to quantities. When you do an excavation, you normally prepare the bottom of the excavation before you do any permanent work there. Right? If you don't make it a separate item for that, if you say excavate trenches, including the preparation of the bottom, okay? Contractor would price this excavation in cubic meters, price the preparation of the bottom and add it to that, divide by this volume and say per cubic meter my rate is so much. Every time additional excavation of a lower depth is instructed, he would say my rate is inapplicable. Why? Because he is under recovering on the preparation of the bottom per cubic meter. And he's right. And similarly, every time the depth is more, he is over recovering on that. To avoid that, BOQ must have room to separate costs which are not proportional to the quantities. That is why we measure two items. Excavation in cubic meters, one item. Preparation of bottom as a separate item. And the same thing comes to road embankments. Embankment in cubic meters, preparation of the top in square meters. Two separate items. And similar piling will have depth board according to session 3. Okay? Depth board in meters. And there is a number of piles item. What is that number of piles item? Because the piling rig has to be set up before you start boring. And that is an expensive operation. You have to bring surveyors, theodolites, everything and set it up. And after drilling, you have to shift it from this place to that place. The cost of setting up the piling rig and shifting it from one place to the other has no bearing whatsoever on the depth board. Whether you bore 5 meters or 10 meters, the cost of setting up and shifting was same. If you allow the contractor to load it onto the depth board, linear meter rate, every time the depth is more, he is over recovering. Every time the depth is less, he is under recovering. He would say my rate is inapplicable. Okay? The same thing comes to trial trenches, trial pits, everything. We have, in addition to the depth board, we also have the number item, the setting up cost. And also we have the mobilization of the piling rig to the site and demobilization. That cost has no bearing whatsoever on the number of piles poured. Whether you go 5 piles, 10 piles or 20 piles, the cost of mobilization and the demobilization remain constant. And therefore there should be another place to price that, which is the method related charges in the preliminary screen. Now we can add single item in bill of quantities for several circumstances requiring average rate price. Like in our boundary work, the cost separation was not possible. Lack of provision in the BOQ to separate cost not proportional to quantities, like in this instance, makes the existing rates and prices inapplicable. Okay. Then we talked about throughout the 10 sessions, we talked about fixed price, firm price contracts. According to FIDIC 4th edition, for instance, or FIDIC 1999 as well, they are contracts where the contract price should be adjusted for price fluctuations. There shall be added to or deducted from the contract price any material, labor, wages. And similarly, due to legislation, okay, if the government passes rules, regulations, according to that, if there is a cost increase, the contract price would be adjusted. If it goes up, contractor gets reimbursement of that. If it goes down, you give it back to the employer. Okay? But in this part of the world, employers do not want to carry that risk. They pass it to the contractor by making the contracts fixed price, firm price contracts. Okay? How do some consultants do that? They sometimes delete this clause. 70.1 they delete. They say through particular conditions, part 2, they say delete 70.1. When you delete 70.1, and what happens? The contract is now silent whether to adjust or not. It becomes an ambiguity. Okay? So we discussed how we resolve ambiguities. The rules of interpretation would come in. If it is the English law, then the contra proferentum principle comes in, right? Employer cannot benefit from it. He is the one who caused the ambiguity. So he cannot rely on that. Whereas according to the civil law, which is applicable to our contracts, the UAE Civil Code, an ambiguity, a doubt should be interpreted in favor of the obliger, which is the contractor. So where the English law says it should not be interpreted in favor of the employer, the civil law says it should be interpreted in favor of the contractor. So the contractor would get his price fluctuations. Okay, if it is deleted. So if you are a consultant, don't delete the clause. You say the contract price shall not be adjusted due to this. And most people leave this one in because this is a difficult risk for tenderers to price the subsequent legislation. Material prices going up in the market, you plot it every day as a contractor in its estimation department. You have your big graph on the wall. You have been plotting it over the past years. You know the trend in material prices going up. You know the trend of the labor wages going up or down. So you can, to some extent, estimate those risks and put them, okay? Or offer more beneficial tender prices to the employer because you know it's not going up or it's probably going down in the future. But subsequent legislation, you cannot. I mean, nobody knows what will happen, whether they would introduce taxes and things like that. We don't know. The midday ban of 4 hours not working, whether they would increase it to 8 hours, nobody knows about it. So those risks we cannot price. And therefore, usually they leave it in. Because if they ask the contractor to price it, the contractor would now price it as a risk and the employer is paying upfront in vain a premium if that risk does not materialize. Okay. So if this is changed, instead of deleting it, somebody says it is changed, for what period are you going to now fix your prices? Sad to say, most consultants, employees, contract administrators, most instructions to tenderers, typical instructions to tenderers of developers here like the Dubai Municipality, the RTA and the DCA and CAPSA and all of them. They say in the instructions to tenderers, the rates and prices shall remain fixed for the contract period. Now what is the contract period? Is it the time for completion? Is it the time for completion plus extensions of time? Is it the time for completion, extensions of time plus the defects liability period? Is it all that plus the 13 years allowed by law for a party to bring an action under that contract? Is that the contract period? One would interpret it one way and the other way. There will be dispute about it. So the tenderers must write and ask, for what period should they be? When I drafted the Dubai Properties contract in House 1, I made it time for completion plus defects liability period. At least if you know up to this date only. Otherwise the tenderer must mention in the tender, the qualification. Our rates and prices should remain valid for up to say 31st December 2016. Okay? So now what would happen? Fluctuations of labor, materials and other costs, subsequent legislation 70.2 would make the rates and prices inapplicable if now your rates and prices would be inapplicable. And similarly, instructive variations beyond the fixed price per price duration. Not contract period, you must get it fixed. Contract period is undefined. You must get it fixed. Then, beyond that, if there are variations, your rates and prices will become inapplicable to value. This clause is a very interesting clause, subclause 52.2. We spent a lot of time during our sound contract administration course, if you remember, on this particular clause alone. Sometimes you have to ask for a varied rate or price to compensate you for your under recoveries. Let's look at an example. Let us say we have got 10 street lamp posts in our project. Okay? And the engineer instructs to omit one street lamp post. Okay? Now as the contractor you can say, I cannot do the balance 9 at the BOQ rate. Why? Because you plan to bring all 10 in one truck to the site. Therefore 1/10 of your transport cost is in the rate. I plan to bring one mobile crane to the site for one day to erect all 10. Therefore, 1/10 of the erection cost is in my rate. Now you remove 1 out from that, you pay me only for 9, I get 9/10 of the delivery cost, 9/10 of the erection cost. And I have lost 1/10. Therefore, my rates are inapplicable now. Give me an increase on that, 1%, 2%. There you are. Your rates became inapplicable to value the existing work, not only variations. Yes.
But in the condition from the contract that the employer, he's got the right to omit or delete, provided they stay 25%, within 25% of contract value.
Yeah, or 15. That is subclause 52.3.
Yeah.
We spent some 3 hours on subclause 52.3 alone. There are 12 misconceptions about subclause 52.3. One is that people think when the quantity goes up or down, contractor can ask for a varied rate of price under 52.3. Some people say engineer has the authority to instruct only up to that. When it goes up or down, up to the 25% or 50%. There are many misconceptions. One, subclause 52.3 is only a head office overhead adjustment of the contractors. We looked at 3 worked examples on that, if you recall. We are going to repeat those clauses. It's a good, good for a discussion, that particular one, if you can attain in the future. It is only a head office overhead under recovery. I'll give you an example. Contractor has distributed his head office overheads, let us say 10%. In a 100 million contract has built within this 100 million, 10 million as his head office overheads. Okay? Now, if these rates, now this 10 million is in the rates, if you use these rates to remeasure work done on site in a remeasurement contract, BOQ says 100,000 fill. When you go to actual remeasure, it's only 50,000. So part of this 10 million gets under recovered. Isn't it? And similarly, if the employer now takes an omission, one interchange omitted. Now the contract is doing only 70 million worth. Isn't it? From this he is taking only 7 million to the head office to support his head office. But he needs 10 million to support the head office. Who is giving his balance 3 million? Should he pocket it out and make a loss? Is he the cost? No. The employer deprived him of taking the 10 million from this project by omitting. Subclause 52.3 allows him to get the restoration of the under recovery, but up to plus or minus 15%. So up to 15% the contractor assumes the risk, and therefore as long as the contractor takes home up to 8.5 million, he can't ask for it back. But since he is now taking only 7, he can ask for 1.5 million back from the employer. And similarly, there is a 100 million contract. The employer instructs the contractor to do 25 million more work. And from this at 10%, the contractor is taking home 12.5 million to support his head office. Whereas he should have taken only 10 million. So he's taking more. Okay? Which the employer can take it back. But up to plus or minus 15%, both parties undertake the risk. Therefore, as long as the contractor takes anything up to 11.5 million, employer can't take it back. And now the employer can take back the 1 million. That is subclause 52.2. Very complex, very confusing clause. Okay? Without realizing the actual intention and the purpose of this clause, some employers, engineers would now increase that 15% to 25%, 30%, 40%. What happens? Contractor would do work up to that, the employer can't take it back. But they increase it thinking, that is the limit to which the engineer can instruct variation. That is one of the 12 misconceptions. We'll do that session again one of these days. Okay? So therefore, necessity to restore an under recovery when an omission is instructed, like in the street lamppost example that we did. With that rates I was given 1 hour to finish this, I'm about 10 minutes over it, but I will give you time to ask questions and answers after this. Finally, I said 1 dozen. Yes. In the drafting of contract agreement, we spent some 3 hours on this. Can you remember how to draft contracts and subcontracts? And when we went back home after that class, we looked at our contracts and subcontracts and saw that most of them are not worth the paper they are drafted on because they are not legally binding. and therefore cannot be enforced because the 9 basic ingredients are missing. Okay. And in that particular one, you remember this whiteboard at our famous training center, Al-Fudail Training Center is where that we had these classes. That is your whiteboard. I took a photo of that at that time. And we discussed, and these are those 8 or 9 basic ingredients that should be present in a contract, without which the contract is void or voidable. Offer, acceptance, consideration, certainty, possibility, legality, capacity, intention to create legal relations, and in this part of the world, good faith and fair dealings. And we talked about the LOIs, letter of intents and letter of acceptance, where there are a lot of misconceptions again. Letter of intent, the purpose of a letter of intent is merely to give a comfort to the contractor so that he can think about recruiting people, look at the long lead items. That's the purpose of a letter of intent, because it says we intend to enter into a contract with you in the future. The contract does not form because there is no offer and the acceptance. Acceptance of the offer of the tender does not take place when you issue the LOI. But in this part of the world, we say we intend to enter into a contract, but nevertheless you proceed with the works. And there are many projects where the contractor works on the strength of a letter of intent. So what would happen halfway through? If the contract is never signed, letter of acceptance is never issued, and the project is abandoned, can the contractor get paid because there is no contract? Yeah, because the law would say, though there is no formal contract, there is a quasi-contract. Quasi-contract is a virtual contract. Virtual contract. Okay? Quasi-contract. Because the law does not accept that one party can tell another party to do something and not pay for it. But you have to remember, the bill of quantities is out of the window. All the rate prices are inapplicable. You do your valuation on quantum meruit, a fair price for the work done, on quantum meruit. That is the 12th one, ladies and gentlemen, when your whole BOQ becomes inapplicable to value because there was no contract form and the valuation has to be on quantum meruit. Okay. Lack of a provision in the BOQ to price the errors, to where range prices become a single item, to price 2 of them, and all these are, ladies and gentlemen, lack of provision in the BOQ to separate cost not proportional to quantity can be avoided if the QS consultants who are preparing the bill of quantities for the employer do their job right. Measure it strictly in accordance with the method of measurements, no errors, on all items where there are different cost considerations, you separate it. Okay? And these things like the economies of scale, the way it works out, because variations are instructed, only all these problems arise. So the next possibility is don't instruct variations. Okay. How can you not instruct variations? Well, the employer's contract administrators should do their job properly. Mostly variations are required to satisfy the employer's whim and fancy, his requirements. Identify them during the design stage. Identify all the employer's requirements and convey them to the designers, and then do design audit to ensure that the designers do their job properly. And before the documents go out to tender, make a thorough document audit to ensure that it's there. If so, you can avoid all this. Okay? And fluctuations, of course, depends on the risk allocation. If the employer retains the risk, then it becomes, if you want to pass it to the contractor, pass it to the contractor. And don't let the contractors work on LOIs. Sign the contract. You issue the LOI, okay, or sign the contract. So you avoid all these issues. With that, I'll give you now an opportunity to ask any questions that you have.
One question.
Yeah.
Even the BOQ is down condition.
Yeah.
Price adjustment.
Right.
The contract is still can should be the adjustment of quantities.
Unfortunately not, because then the question is, in the category C lump sum tenders, contractor would have easily in the bill of quantities cut the 100, put 200, put the rate 50. Because the instructions to tenderers clearly states, if you make any amendment to the documents, your tender is rejected. So he cannot make any adjustment. No, he can't add the items, he can't alter items. That is why that rate became inapplicable. Otherwise, if he was permitted to cut 100 to 200, then he may put a rate of 50.
But that difference can be priced in the market. When he prices unit rates, like as you said.
Well, it is a huge risk for a tenderer to distribute that 5,000 in some other item. Because if those items are deleted, he's losing money from the boundary wall company. So no sensible estimator tenderer would put it elsewhere. He wants to put it in this item, because this is the item where the over-recovery, under-recovery would take place, and he has the right to ask for a variant rate of price for that, because the contract allows that. So it is safe to put it in there.
Doctor, my
Yes.
question is related to case C, where the tender was not affordable to price the additional quantity or additional items separately in the bill of quantities.
Right.
What happens then if an item of work is shown on the drawings,
Right.
but it is not measured in the bill of quantities?
Completely out, yeah.
Yeah. It is not there. There is no rate,
Right.
there is no item of work.
Correct.
Now, this item can be a matter of variation.
Right.
You can omit or increase the quantities.
Yeah.
Then how do you value the omission or addition?
Addition, right, okay. We are talking about lump sum contract again, because if it is a remeasurement contract, very straightforward. If there is an item in the drawings, but not in the BOQ, you measure and pay the contractor by agreeing on a new rate. Right? So if the item is the chandelier, is shown in the drawings, but it is not in the BOQ. In a lump sum contract, can the contractor ask for additional money for that? No. It is deemed included somewhere. Now, the contractor has put that money somewhere, but he has put it in some safe place, possibly the preliminary bill in his supervision or somewhere. He would not load it into the excavation, he would not load it in the concrete or reinforcement, which is a very risky thing to do, because if those things, so he will put it somewhere where the least of the variations would occur. Now, if that chandelier is increased 1 to 2, in the first round, of course, the contractor would say, sorry, I will not do that because it is not necessary. This project can be completed with one chandelier. If you want a second chandelier, this is my price for it. Okay? If the chandelier is omitted, how much is to be omitted? That is a tough one. Okay? New additional one you can refuse and you say, my price is this if you want it. If that chandelier is omitted, how much? Well, you will again work out a new rate the same way that in a remeasurement contract, if the item is to be priced, you build the rate up from first principles. For every work item in the construction industry, oil and gas field, MEP, landscaping, for every work item, there is an international norm. If you take the books like the Spons, you can find that norm. For a cubic meter of concrete, there is so much of cement, so much of aggregate, so much of sand, so much of water, so much of machine hours, so much of labor hours for a specific strength concrete. And you know the market rates for each of these base materials are labor rates. You put that and your overheads and profit margin would build up the rate. Of course, if you have your own norms here, if you are using international norms, you'll have to do a correction. There should be a weighting factor, because in America, one American can lift an 8 feet by 4 feet MDF sheet, he carries a load. Here we need 4 Asians to carry that, right? So therefore the same labor factor would not be applicable here. You'll have to increase it, if you use the international norms. But there are ways of it. That is what you will do. Yes.
So in this instance, we assume we do
Yeah.
it just with the
Yes.
planning.
That is item and
They don't ask for the breakdown of variable.
no.
Any other questions?
First, I would like to thank you for this wonderful session. There's one question regarding multi-tier subcontracting.
Right.
In one of the projects, the main contractor employed subcontractor,
Right.
MEP subcontractor,
Right.
and MEP subcontractor employed
Another
another
subcontractor. Right.
And each subcontractor and they
Okay.
claim for overhead and profit.
Right.
So this project was based on fitting radius rate book.
Right.
So what is your opinion on this? Should we allow the overriding profit for subcontractor and another subcontractor, sub to subcontractor? So
Yeah.
it becomes multi-tier.
Yes. We saw the 4 ways of valuing a variation by the engineer when it is instructed on the main contractor. If the existing rates are applicable, you use that. So if the variation in the existing rates are applicable, you have no problem. You use that. If that work is done by whatever tier of subcontractor, you don't mind. Contractor, if he has not loaded that rate properly, he will take losses. That's fine. Only where a new rate has to be built up, the problem starts. Okay. If it is of specialist work nature, if that subcontractor has to be used that particular work, that subcontractor's standard markup should be paid by the employer, okay, because the main contractor, that is a cost to the main contractor. If the main contractor gives work to a subcontractor for his convenience, something that he could have done, he's doing for convenience, then from first principles you will build up the rate for it. You will not look at, okay, but certain work are there. For instance, let us look at another example. Contractor is asked to install a water heater, water geyser. Okay. Now the water geyser could be bought off the shelf in the shop at 300 dirhams. Okay. Now that 300 dirhams includes the manufacturer's manufacturing costs and his overheads and profits margin and the suppliers and the distributor and the shopkeeper's margin, everything. Okay. But we are paying all that when we pay the contractor the 300 for the water geyser. Okay? Because he cannot manufacture a water geyser. He has to buy it in the market. And similarly, if the additional work instructed is of a nature that he cannot do, he has to go to a subcontractor. All those, whatever the tier, all those will have to. And main contractor set of his over that. But if it is of a nature that he can do, but for his convenience he is going to a subcontractor, then you will build up the rate on the first principles by using international norms for that and pay that. So it depends on the circumstances. Yes, please. Yeah.
I have one question. See, there is an item in the BOQ,
Yeah.
but the drawing, that item is not there.
Right.
The contractor, by mistakenly, he put the price in the BOQ for
Right.
a particular item.
Okay.
So how it will, so if the variation arises,
Yeah.
so how it will be evaluated? I don't
Right.
know the-
Okay. One of the very first things that we discussed during our CPD events previously, when we were doing section number 1, variations and valuations of variations, is what the engineer can instruct, which is very common for us, okay, to write in our contractual letter writing, contractual variations to the contract, variations of the contract and things like that. Can the contract be varied? Of course not. Contract is either that legal relationship between the two contracting parties, if it is written with the lowercase c, like in the formation of contract, performance of contract, breach of contract, written in the contract, or according to FIDIC types of contracts, written with capital C, it is a bundle of documents. Okay, drawing specifications, list of quantities, contract agreement, appendix tender, form of tender, everything put together is also called the contract. Can that be varied by the engineer? No. The small c contract he can't vary, only the two people who entered into that contract, employer and the contractor, can vary by signing an amendment to that. And that bundle of documents also he can't vary because, for instance, one of the documents say the penalties are 100,000 a day, can you make it 50,000? He cannot. And therefore we go and by interpretation come to what he can vary. What he can vary is the works. And the works is that product, which is the building, the road, the bridge. The works can be varied by him. So how can he vary the works? Where are the works shown? Works are shown in the drawings, what to do, and works are shown in the specifications, how to do it. Does the bill of quantities tell the contractor what to do and how to do it? Of course not. The bill of quantities is prepared by a quantity surveyor. He doesn't know how to tell the contractor what to do and how to do it. It is the designers and the engineers who prepare the drawings and the specifications who know how to tell the contractor what to do and how to do it. By looking at those drawings and specifications, the QS put a place for the tenderers to put a price in. But sad to say, there are very senior consultants in this part of the world who would issue instructions to omit the BOQ item. Change the BOQ item. You can't do that. Okay? So the BOQ items, quantities cannot be instructed as variations. So drawing specification, the works can be changed, yes, if appropriate or necessary. And also one thing that we discussed then is if it would appreciate or invalidate the contract, you cannot still vary it. We talked about the tunnel to the bridge example. We could go into all that detail stuff later. So therefore, engineer cannot instruct any changes to the bill of quantities. Only, so therefore, if the drawings don't have the chandelier, but the BOQ shows a chandelier, okay? This is a lump sum contract. There are two possibilities that the engineer and the employer would be looking for. One, if they don't want a chandelier because it's not there in the scope, drawings don't show the chandelier, therefore it's not in the scope. One, the engineer would try to omit the BOQ item with the chandelier in not payment, which he can't do. Next one, you would try to tell the contractor, there you are, the chandelier is there, you construct it. That's the other one he would try to do. Okay? No, he doesn't have to construct the chandelier which is in the BOQ for which he gets paid. He doesn't have to construct because that was not in the scope of work. And look at the obverse scenario. If there was a chandelier in the drawings, but it was missing in the BOQ, when he constructs the chandelier, if he asks for payment, will the employer pay him? Of course not. And similarly, if there is a chandelier in the bill of quantities, okay, employer cannot say, omit that or do it. It is only the scope of work shown in the drawings and the specifications that the contractor has the obligation to do. With that, I think, ladies and gentlemen,